right. Oops. Okay. Okay. Hey. And here we are, recording in progress, live YouTube. Sometimes things go wrong. Hey, it's David Dayen, and we are here on the Prospect Weekly Roundup. I wasn't here last week, so I missed everybody. Welcome back. We are going to talk about a number of issues with a special guest, Dan Boguslaw, who has been helping us out at the Prospect since January. Dan, how are you doing?
Doing good. Special guest, special correspondent.
Special contributor, special
Special contributor.
contributor.
Okay.
I don't know what to say, but you've been helping us out and it's been great. Um, I want to get into a couple of your stories, a couple of my stories on the week. It's been kind of a whirlwind of a week. But let's put at least the first bit of things that we're going to talk about under the rubric of why we can't have nice things. So the first one that I want to talk about is, it's tax day, I guess was Tuesday, and almost immediately after that, news broke that the IRS's direct file program, which has been in use 2024 and in a more expanded role in 2025, will not be coming back for the 2026 tax season. Could you tell us what IRS direct file is, and then we'll get into why we can't have this nice thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, this whole idea has a, I mean, as far as I've been counting, and I counted in my piece 30 years, but a long history of politicians knowing how insane the American tax filing system is, knowing that, there's a famous Donald Rumsfeld letter that circulates on Twitter once a year, where even the former Secretary of Defense says he has no idea whether he got his taxes right, actually due to Donald Rumsfeld's own inabilities. But it gets to the point, which is that filing taxes yourself in America is a maddening process. It is far more difficult than it needs to be. And so there's been a decades-long movement to try to simplify that process. At first, by instructing the IRS and federal agencies to create a system where people could file for free, that was simplified, that made the hair-raising prospect of filing your taxes easier. And over the course of 3 decades, the tax preparation software groups have lobbied heavily with tons of financial firepower against making this a reality, namely because they earn tens of millions of dollars every year by charging consumers to file their taxes.
Right.
So this battle has been going on. There's actually a slide that was leaked to ProPublica that shows the graph going up and down of when the filing companies have had wins, when they've been able to block the advancement of a free filing program, and when members of Congress have succeeded in trying to force them into this. And there have been some successes where eventually they were mandated to create a free version of their software,
Right.
so people wouldn't have to pay hundreds of dollars. But they created all these tricks and workarounds where the free version was hidden from Google search results. And you'd start the free version and then you get redirected into a version that you'd have to pay for. So, anyways, it's been a long saga with a lot of lobbying cash thrown around, millions and millions and millions of dollars pumped into this, lobbying both GOP and Democrats. And finally, this week,
Right,
the
but you're missing one step here. So in 2022, we had this breakthrough after
yes,
many years of this deception. There were lawsuits over this deception. There was major media reports. In 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act has this little rider that says we're going to fund the IRS to create a free filing system of their own and stand it up on their own. And as you mentioned in this piece, which is at the at prospect.org, this is not unlike pretty much every industrialized country in the world. So that low income folks, people who can't afford, accountants or tax preparers, can just have their stuff done, to do it in a simple and easy way, a direct filing way for free. And in 2022, late 2022, they authorized this. In 2024, it comes online for the 2020 previous year's tax season. It gets a 90+% satisfaction rating. People love it. Hundreds of thousands of people use their taxes. It's only in a few states in the first year. This tax season, it's in 25 states. We haven't gotten the satisfaction ratings yet, but I haven't heard a bad word. And then throughout this whole time, when Free File is in place, direct file from the IRS is in place, Intuit, which is the biggest tax preparation company, maker of TurboTax, goes to work and tell us about some of the sums that they were putting into the government, into Congress, into the presidency, in order to try to stop this emergent direct file system from the IRS.
I mean, in the last decade, it's on the order of well over 10 million. And if you look just at
In the
the
last couple of years, I think
yeah,
it's on the order
yeah,
of that.
and
Yeah,
that's on top of the, I believe it was $144 million settlement that they paid out from people who had filed and been coerced into paying for
sure.
their filing options. We looked at the first quarter of 2025 and saw that there's well over $100,000 just in that quarter alone.
I think it was 240,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this has been a nonstop um, um, process for them. And I remember even when I first started reporting for the Prospect 5 or 6 years ago, we were reporting on Democratic chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Richie Neal, being lobbied and his involvement in sort of putting up roadblocks
Right.
to see any piece of the cake taken out of Intuit's
Sure.
operation.
And then
But
the
I,
one
I
thing
think
you mentioned is how they, a lot of this lobbying money goes towards Congress, lobbying Congress. But you talk about the sort of much more direct way in which Intuit tried to influence the real decider here, which is the great unitary executive leader, Donald Trump.
Right. So they lined up with every other Silicon Valley chief and gave $1 million to the inaugural fund, and released, just a ridiculous statement about bipartisanship and making, streamlining the taxpayer experience. But I wanted to talk a little bit about like the big picture of this because
Mhm.
it's kind of unfathomable how poorly Democrats, with some exceptions, have fumbled the ball on this issue area. I mean, over and over again, we see every wipeout cycle, whether it's Trump getting elected or whether it's disastrous midterm performances. We see people saying the Democrats have to get back to pocketbook issues and they have to get back to brass tacks. And it's hard to think of something people loathe and hate more, not only doing their taxes, but paying a third party corporation to hand the government their check. So I think there have been champions. Elizabeth Warren has been on this issue over and over and over again. She's dedicated a lot of attention to it, but I think it belies a greater failure in the Democratic Party where, if you think about what GOP messaging would look like on this, it'd be rabid frothing at the mouth. And so it's sad that we're seeing this long hard fought battle kind of go over to Intuit, into the corporations. But I also think we have to think about, what could the Democrats have done differently? This is such a visceral issue. I mean, this week I banged my head against the wall doing it and
Right.
tried to find my way to wiggle out of paying these guys. On top of what I already owed. And it's a visceral, universal experience. And it's rare in
Yeah.
American society to have something that people on different ends of the political spectrum are fully synced on.
Right. It's very unifying. There's not a single person who hasn't had this experience unless, you just came of working age and you've only used direct file for the last 2 years.
Right.
You're the only people in America who have never paid somebody or some corporation to do their taxes. So it is a very unifying issue. And there's just so much damn money in Washington that Intuit is able to successfully get their way as soon as the stars align and enough people on their side get in power. Yeah, it's a good question on what Democrats could have done differently on this. But I mean, if you think about the suite of issues where they could really paint Republicans as desiring to allow companies to rip you off, this is a really, really big one. So I agree with that.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I mean, look, part of the problem was that the Democrats were taking Intuit money. I mean, they didn't have a unified front on this, you
Right.
know?
I
And
mean, certainly that, we see a lot of them sort of backing into it now, but it's a lower level issue somewhat. And outside of Senator Warren's office, and, I mean, I think Senator Warren was instrumental in getting this into the bill in the first place in the Inflation Reduction Act. And one of her former deputies, Bharat Ramamurthy, was majorly involved inside the government at the National Economic Council in getting this done. Hopefully, if we do have a change of power, we'll see this move in again. And maybe, once it's in place around the country to everybody for 2 years, for 3 years, for 4 years, and then it gets maybe more entrenched. I think 1 year and then sort of a shaky second year where they kind of downplayed it. They didn't really advertise it very much. Scott Bessent said, the Treasury Secretary said, we're going to use it for the 25 tax season, but they kind of downplayed it. They didn't advertise it too much.
and
Uh,
I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there was reporting that Doge was thinking about highlighting it at one point as a
there
win.
was, in fact, Elon Musk said, like, government should be doing all these taxes for free. Maybe it's some sort of, European mindset or
Right.
something. like he did say that at one point. And it's been a weird part of Republican messaging off and on. During the last tax reform bill, Paul Ryan said, we'll be able to do your taxes on an index card now. It's going to be so easy. But then always Intuit gets in there and figures this out, how to frustrate it. So yeah, I mean, I want to move on to speaking of scams, speaking of financial scams, speaking of ripping off the American people. After the 2008 financial crisis, there was one agency that was founded to sort of center all of the consumer protection laws around financial transactions in one place. That would have a dedicated mission, and that was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, ever since the Trump administration came into power, they have been gunning for the CFPB. A lot of this speculation is Elon Musk wants to turn X into an everything app that includes financial payments. And so he sees CFPB as very detrimental to his ability to create this. And he doesn't want them looking into his payment app. So, back in February, CFPB was put into the hands temporarily of Russ Vought, he's the head of the Office of Management and Budget, but he's now the acting director of the CFPB. He immediately did this massive stop work order to basically stop CFPB from doing anything. He closed the headquarters. He said we don't need any more money in their allotment from the Federal Reserve because it's part of the Fed. And a federal judge over the course of months, put a temporary or preliminary injunction on the firing of employees and the stopping of work. Basically, there was a plan in place to fire everybody at CFPB, and that was put to a stop. There was an appeal of that at the DC Circuit, which kind of opened the door a crack, saying, okay, if you do what is called a particularized assessment, where you see, you have to look at every single division and office within CFPB, and if you think that they're not necessary to fulfill statutory duties, then okay, you can do some firing. So within 3 days of the appeals court writing that, CFPB fired 1,483 people. This was yesterday. They fired all these people, said, you're going to be cut off from your access to your computers tomorrow, today now, Friday at the close of business. Technically, you'll still be an employee for 60 days, but you won't be doing anything. They destroyed entire offices within CFPB, including ones not only that have statutory obligations, but also offices that Mark Paletta, who's the chief legal officer of CFPB and also a big friend of Clarence Thomas's, said in a memo stating the new priorities of CFPB. Here are our top priorities. One was service members. They cut the Office of Service Members down to one person. He said another one was the Fair Credit Reporting Act. He got rid of every attorney and supervisor working on the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So even under their own terms, they were making it impossible for this agency to function. And in the broader sense, whether it is maintaining a consumer complaint database or having a student loan ombudsman that looks into student loan issues, all of these statutory things, they're in Dodd-Frank. The CFPB shall maintain XYZ. None of those things were kept in place. So the update here, and I'm sorry to be rambling, and I'll ask you a question in a second, but there was a hearing just an hour or so ago in federal court with the district judge, Amy Berman Jackson, who had put together the preliminary injunction initially. And she said, this is kind of ridiculous. What is your particularized assessment? Mark Paletta put a declaration out where he laid out exactly, how many people he thinks are necessary to carry out these functions. And he literally says, the Office of Service Member Affairs is statutory. I think one person can do that job. He says the Office of Fair Lending, which has statutory authority to handle the Truth in Lending Act, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, the Homeowners Disclosure Act. He has one person in that agency covering the entire country, anti-discrimination laws for the entire country, multiple laws, one person. So it's like a window into the MAGA mind of what it takes to actually do consumer protection. So Judge Jackson put this on hold. She said, we're going to have a hearing in a couple of weeks that I want to know specifically how this followed the particularized assessment and whether this is, the agency is still able to fulfill its statutory duties. So it looks like this reduction in force is at least on hold temporarily. But the larger point is that even if you force the agency to have a few people more than the 200 that are currently working there, it's not likely that they're going to be doing much of anything to help consumers. And this is another case of, you talk about pocketbook issues, the right to not be ripped off.
Yeah. And
and
it goes back
go ahead.
It goes back to my earlier point too, which is that we have seen hesitation. We have seen blinking in the Trump administration when they start to touch stuff that they know has mass bipartisan appeal. Social Security, Medicare. These things, the light goes off. Steve Bannon starts screaming about it on his program. And, look, if you look at Steve Bannon and you look at his comments of that populist sector of the right-wing MAGA movement, you see favorability towards people like Lena Khan. You see a favorability towards the sort of Warrenite wing of the Democratic Party. And I think if we compare this CFPB issue to the Intuit thing that we were talking about at the beginning, the ability to dismantle this agency in the blink of an eye, right, to do a mass purge is on the one hand a result of the hyper acceleration of the unitary executive theory that was started under George Bush. But in another sense, if we're thinking forward looking, it also represents a failure for Democrats outside of Elizabeth Warren to realize that they should have been promoting the hell out of the CFPB in the same way that they promote the hell out of the Social Security Administration or any other pocketbook issue. And the fact that it's progressives responding to this, or as you see on Twitter, sometimes the errant MAGA person saying, hold on, wait a second. I called the CFPB. I filed a complaint because I got scammed. And they wrote back to me and it was great. Are we sure we want to be cutting this?
Right.
It represents the Democratic Party's unwillingness to elevate consumer issues over the corporate cartel. And, we saw a tepid attempt to do this under the Biden administration, but it should have been plastered over everything. And instead of trying to strike this grand bargain where the Democratic Party can take billionaire money hand over fist and, tip the hat in the FTC and make some concessions is ludicrous, and we're seeing that now. Who's stumping? Who's drawing tens of thousands of people? It's Bernie and AOC. It's people who
Yep.
are just hammering this point over and over and over again. So do I want to put the blame for Trump's madness on the Democratic Party? Absolutely not. At the same time, do I think that there would have been more firepower and more aggravation from the base around this wholesale gutting of the CFPB if they had viewed the CFPB as an ally instead of a pestering layover from 2008? Yes, and it signals the way forward of like, look, when we get a win like this, when we get a populist win that is ratified into a piece of our government, we need to advertise it. We need to
Yeah.
celebrate it. We need to
Yep.
educate people into understanding how essential and incredible that these services are.
I mean, I'll say what another you want to put blame on this just in the short term, not sort of rhetorically or anything. That blame, I think, has to go to the judiciary. I mean, there was no reason for the appeals court to open that door a crack because we knew exactly what would happen. Within 3 business days, they took this little clause about a particularized assessment and turned it into firing 1,483 people.
Right.
It's very obvious that when you're dealing with this MAGA group, whether it's the Vought kids, the Doge kids, or whoever, they're going to you give them an inch and they'll take a mile. And the judiciary has kind of bent over backwards to be accommodating to the executive. And we see this not only with this case or consumer related case, but with, the Supreme Court case with respect to, just name one, the Kilmar Abrego Garcia one, for example, where they changed the fact that the government would have to effectuate the release of this individual from El Salvador to that they'll have to facilitate the release. And that gave a window for the Trump administration to say, well, we can facilitate it by offering a plane if they get rid of them. But if as long as that person is in control of the El Salvadorians, that there's nothing we can do. It's interesting in that case because, I mean, you've harped a little bit on Democratic kind of ineffectualism. But what we saw this week with Chris Van Hollen, the senator from Maryland, was actually quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. I mean,
Yeah, have you
yeah,
seen?
go ahead.
I didn't get a chance to watch. I think he gave another presser like this morning, which I didn't have a chance
That I
to.
haven't seen, but up until last night, I'm up to date. So, Van Hollen represents the state of Maryland. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was living there and therefore is a constituent. He had an order that he couldn't be removed to El Salvador, but he was anyway. The government has admitted that was a mistake, but they're saying, well, it's not out of our hands now. And so Van Hollen went down to San Salvador this week. And he, after days of waiting there, trying to get into the prison, trying to speak directly to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, he actually did yesterday. This is an example. The Trump administration is out there saying, well, there's nothing really we can do with Nayib Bukele. He has the authority to do this. But one senator goes down there and causes enough of kind of an international incident to get this meeting. And Bukele kind of played a Twitter troll kind of attempt by, kind of an I'm not mad, don't tell the press that I'm mad kind of situation by saying that, see, now he's all right. Not my torture dungeon isn't a dungeon or whatever. But, they're continuing to say he's not going to be released. But the power of one Democrat, like actually standing on principle, was really pretty profound in this moment, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And, I've been seeing, look, there have been people both on the MAGA right who are crowing about it. And they're saying, this is going to be plastered on the midterm campaign ads. As far as the eye can see, this guy meeting with this MS-13 member. And then you have Politico reporting unnamed U.S. representatives saying, like, why are we throwing, he's not a citizen, maybe
Democrats.
Democrats, Democratic reps saying he's not a citizen. Maybe if they arrest a citizen, will activate. But it just shows the ludicrous a failure of messaging discipline in the Democratic Party. Because if you look, at the polling on this, and you look at the conservative pundits who are coming out and saying this is madness, this is unconstitutional, this is
Right.
anti-American.
And it's a slippery slope,
It's a
right? Like
complete
if you
slippery
you
slope.
allow someone without due process who was here in the country, who was not allowed to be rendered to that country, you allow that to happen and say, "Oh well, it happened. We made a mistake, but we're not going to reverse it." There's no difference between that and any U.S. citizen being sent elsewhere in the exact same fashion. And if you can't stand up for this principle, you can't stand up for any of them.
Absolutely. And they need to be leaning into that. I mean, again, I like to do the thought exercise of what would the GOP messaging be on this? Like if you could snap your fingers and have the same discipline of that party here, and you can make the argument that they're lackeys to Trump. That's fine. But even before Trump, in various iterations, they had a lot more messaging discipline. And I think if you think about it, the messaging is clear. First it's him, then it's you. It's such a
Right.
simple, visceral reaction that even conservatives are having to this.
Absolutely. And by the way, we have a good piece from Ryan Cooper that hopefully, Lauren, you could get up onto the chat. It's out today. That talks about the fact there is a faction of the Democratic Party that wants to turn immigration into a third rail of politics, right? They want to say, "Oh, we're upside down on that issue. This is everybody's beliefs are aligned with Republicans, and we can't talk about it, no matter if it involves like the core questions of due process, which make us a constitutional government or what." But it's not true. The If you look at the polling right now, that when Trump moves from rhetoric to reality, when people see the real world consequences of what he wants to do, he loses popularity on immigration. The 2 years that Americans said more than any other time in polling, going back to the 60s, that they want more immigrants into the country. Those 2 years were 2020 and 2021. The end point of separating families and all the things that Trump did in the first term. Now we're seeing the exact same dynamic take hold over mass deportation and sending people with no criminal record to El Salvadorian gulags, and sending people who are U.S. citizens or detaining people who are green card holders or even U.S. citizens, I think, in a couple cases.
Yes.
Or the person up at Tufts University, you broke the story of, had the first video of her information, sending basically someone to a detention facility over a thought crime.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but there's a deeper point.
but that's very unpopular,
Yeah, yes,
and it shows.
and fundamentally, if you look at the deportation numbers, if you also look at the directives to the FBI, if you look at the JTTF actions and
Yes,
DHS, I mean, really, this is not about any of the sort of macroeconomic claims or really the national security claims that Trump is talking about. I mean, in the course of what? January, February, in the course of 2 or 3 months, we've seen that all of this rhetoric is being weaponized to expand the dragnet that can be used to
that's
attack
right.
people who have no connection to gangs or terrorist organizations, but who Trump's donors just don't like. I mean, whether it's the student protesters who wrote op-eds,
Right.
or whether it's people with random tattoos of like the Joker, which then you
Right.
read the write-up and they're like, well, the Joker is a known MS-13 gangster.
Right.
It's so really what this is about is creating a mechanism for reinforcing the messaging about terrorist organizations, about gangs, about
They've
violence. But
this is a very key point. They've turned it into yet another iteration of the war on terror and the Bush era kind of global jihadism
yeah,
fight, where they rendered suspects. Like people forget our history here. Like we've done this in the very recent past.
yeah,
We took Muslims, we sent them to Guantanamo without due process. We denied habeas petitions. We did a lot of these things before, And now they're being done to like Venezuelan barbers that happen to have a tattoo.
And that's critical, right? I like that you brought up the Venezuelan barber, right? Some guy who works in like a non-essential domestic manufacturing industry, because Trump also said in a one-off comment that he was going to create protections for critical farm workers in the Central
Right.
Valley. So the whole idea that this is part of this sort of like isolationist reshoring, make America white and full of factories again is also total BS because he's cutting side deals to ensure that all of the huge what are essentially slave labor operations, whether they're in meat packing plants or farm plantations in the Central Valley, have plenty of illegal migrants to power their corporation.
Yes. And this, I think seeing the totality of this, seeing, essentially kidnappings happening on the streets of America, people are find it distasteful. And Democrats like Chris Van Hollen have actually figured out like we need to stand up for the sort of basic protections the Constitution affords uh, um, uh, Americans and anyone in America under this system. My view is that there are kind of two movements happening in America at the same time. So there's a movement of the insiders in the Republican Party, the MAGA folks, who want to basically change what it means to live in America. And there is this movement that has almost no power, that is just people on the street who are attending these rallies. What were there? I think 2 weeks ago, about 3 million people who attended hands off rallies, and there's another set of them scheduled for tomorrow. I think 150,000 people saw Bernie and AOC speak at 3 or 4 rallies. One of them was in Los Angeles, but they were all up in the West Coast, including thousands in places like Idaho and Montana. Um, that movement doesn't have much power, but it has a voice. And it can sort of shame or force in some way or another Democrats who do have a larger megaphone to act. And I think we're starting to see that with whether you talk about Van Hollen or whether you talk about Cory Booker's thing. And I know a lot of people think that was just performative, but it did galvanize the country to a certain extent. I think you're seeing this larger mass movement. Heck, David friggin' Brooks said we need a mass movement at this point. There is like the country is kind of dying for a united front around these issues to rein in what they see as a out of control mad king. And Democrats, need to get more of the message, but I think some of them are at least starting to get the message that we need to deliver that.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, I have a piece I'm going to pitch you for next week, but,
Well, I wanted you to preview it to the people here. Let's take people inside the process.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that, I was thinking a lot about like, uh, I've done a lot of national security reporting and I was sort of looking into some of that. And I was thinking like, you know, what is different now than in 2016 when we also had this like resistance wave, right? But
Right.
somehow it felt a lot less, it felt much more messaging. It felt much more, and in a sense, it was because Trump hadn't quite grown the fangs that he has now. He was still he had these kind of holdovers from the last administration, at least in some of the national security roles at the beginning of his term. And now it's mask off and it's gloves off. But I also think that change means that people at the local level are willing to take risks and are mobilized in a way that is
Right.
different than in 2016 because
That's
then they weren't feeling it. They weren't feeling the fear of the tariffs, just wiping stuff out, going online, checking their retirement accounts. There was not this feeling that your life is going to change. And I think now it's like, people in affluent neighborhoods, like you mentioned, the video I got from Somerville, are seeing people, pulled off the street corner that they walk down with their kids. So I
right.
think that this time around there is a hunger and there is a consistency and there is a eagerness that people are going to say, you know what, I'm not going to write you a campaign check to my progressive rep. I
Right.
need to see results. So next week I have some local policies that some very progressive strongholds have enacted in the past, which once seemed only achievable in those strongholds. But now
Mhm.
I think we're seeing people show up at their senators' offices. We're seeing people demand, I don't want messaging. thank you for the filibuster, but that's the first step. And so I think we actually have the potential to see an incredible revitalization of states' rights, cities' rights, but instead of it
Yeah.
being Tea Party libertarian secessionism, being grassroots progressive activism at the state, city, county level.
I
And so I
do
think
think
it's very
yeah.
happening.
No, that's really interesting. I think you're right that this resistance is different. And, I think in the first term, the resistance professionalized very quickly. And I don't want to say that it was astroturf or something like that. I think there was legitimate concern and fear, and those women's marches did come out of something pretty organic,
Yeah.
but it professionalized very quickly. And now I think what you're seeing, because there's a there was a tendency to believe early on in this term from professional Democrats that resistance didn't work. And the reason that they thought it didn't work is that Trump was back in power. Never mind the decisions that were made in the intervening 8 years. Never mind that the 2018 midterms were actually wildly successful for Democrats. They got it in their heads that the resistance couldn't be the same way this time, that we're going to have to accommodate Donald Trump because he won, some sort of mandate. They imagined in their heads that it was some sort of landslide. And so that resistance was it was not allowed to be professionalized. And honestly, that was probably, in retrospect, we're going to look back at this and say, good thing
Yeah, yeah,
that
it's
wasn't
funny.
allowed to
Yeah,
happen.
and I want to go back to David Brooks here for a second because on that op-ed that's been circulating, he says, every corner of society, the universities, the corporations, the people, we need this rise up, and it shows that it hasn't quite sunk through, which is that Trump effectively scared those institutions shitless, and that's
Yes.
why we have people in the streets because they realized, the
No one's
big
going to help us. No one else
yeah,
is going to
yeah.
be out there.
Half of the firms capitulated immediately and said, "Okay, we're going to pay you so that we can stay in business." Now, okay, great. Harvard is backtracking and saying, "Okay, actually, we have a $50 billion endowment. We can
Right.
take a $2 billion hit," but Columbia sure as hell didn't, and they're basically halfway into receivership. And so I think
Yeah.
there's a sense that people, and even their elected officials, they saw, they couldn't
Mhm.
stomach. They voted 99-0 to confirm Rubio. Now he's the guy sending embassy security officials to arrest these students who they claim
Right.
are supporting terrorist organizations.
Right.
So I think that there was this idea of a warm womb inside the institutions the first time around in 2016 that people, and there was an influx of donations, Planned Parenthood, ACLU, you name it. The big guns in the
Yep.
Liberal Party were opening up and filling the coffers, and then people were going into those organizations, and that's not happening now. People are
People
freaked out.
you're not hearing about those groups. You're hearing about these new organizations, these new entities. And I think that analysis is pretty spot on. There was a sense in 2016 the institutions would save us, and there's a sense today that they're not going to. And it's also that Trump kind of figured out, oh, these are the people that fought me in 2016, so I'm going to make their lives a living hell.
Right.
And if I do that, then I have the opportunity to really put this entire nation under my thumb.
And
And
it's
and
it's yeah,
and it was working. It was
right.
working. But like you say, sometimes the dogs won't eat the dog food, and the people were rising up.
Yeah, and it's ironic that him and Turning Point USA are pointing to the institutions and the colleges and saying, this is where the real communists are. This is where
Right.
the real bomb throwers are. And the reality is that those institutions have siphoned off a lot of that pure radical energy. And if you talk to people on the left or the far left, they'll say, like, yeah, down with those institutions. Like those institutions are a momentum block, right?
Right.
So there's an irony. I think there's a really deep irony to when Trump says, unleashing the tariffs, and you get Elon and all these economic advisors coming out and saying, the American worker is going to have to bite the bullet on this one for a second. No pain, no
Right.
gain. When in reality, there's a similar phenomenon taking place on the left where we're watching some of these institutions crumble, and it's painful, and we're seeing these advocacy groups overwhelmed with requests and all these things. But at the same time, you're seeing a level of activism and a level of activation that would be missing if people are able to sit on their couch and say, well, the ACLU's got it, Planned Parenthood's got it. They're feeling like, no, I have to have it.
Yeah.
People in my community are getting snatched.
Yeah, there's a potential for something really galvanizing here. And there's also the potential for that not working, right? I mean, look, the reason the institutions were, somewhat successful at reining in Trump in the first term is that they have some level
They have money
of
in the bank. Yeah.
yeah, they have power. They have money and power, you know, ordinary people certainly can change the world, but it doesn't always happen, right? There are certainly examples from history of nations where there were uprisings that were quashed, and so it takes eternal vigilance. It's a comforting narrative to say, and the people will rise and
No,
stop the great dictator, but it doesn't
look,
always happen.
no, and I'll be the first to say that having done my fair share of time in those spaces, there's also a tendency for the most unhinged people, whether it's
Right.
Occupy or any movement, to rise to the top. I'm not going to name names, but there's a certain primary challenge taking place in the Great Lakes region that is a little head scratching, where you have a very young activist
Yeah,
challenging
I know who you're talking about.
progressive members of Congress, and you're kind of asking yourself, like, why is this happening? This seems like a real waste of this energy. So
Right. I'll
I
give you an
think,
example that's just even more kooky. I went to one of these Tesla takedown protests here in LA, and it was in Santa Monica. There's a showroom in Santa Monica, and there was there are these like kind of evangelicals that are always out protesting, and they were like, hey, there's a protest, let's go. And so they brought their John 3:16 things, and they had the bullhorn and everything, and they were basically disrupting what was attempted to be done. And the hilarious part is that so they were like, there was jostling between these two factions, and they were trying to push these other guys out of the way, and at the same time the Tesla takedown folks were chanting, the people united should never be defeated. So sometimes our protest movements get a little inchoate in America. I think mainly because we have very little history of it. But yeah, I mean, so I think, and what you had just alluded to is the sort of opportunism that comes out of this. Like, we've heard a lot about the gerontocracy. We've heard a lot about the age of the Democratic Party, that it's out of touch and things like that. And, there isn't a one-to-one relationship between age and effectiveness,
right.
and or age and where you stand on the issues. And
Right.
it's not just the person you described, but there's a race in Indianapolis where a guy is clearly to the right. He's running to the right of a progressive member of Congress, and it's basically all on this affect of new generation, new ideas kind of thing.
Yeah, and
I think it's dangerous.
yeah, it's a new identity category in a sense, and I
Yeah,
believe there's a nonprofit that's like backing young Dem candidates across the political spectrum under the auspice of, like, they're younger, and it's a
right,
horrible idea. It's so stupid, and it's
right,
also just like, you know, in politics is a messy game. Sometimes you wield that cudgel effectively, and sometimes you don't. But the idea of creating a new identity category for young people, as if that's some unique,
right.
pure qualification for holding higher, elected office, is ludicrous. So absolutely agree with you. There are pitfalls
Yeah.
everywhere with an emerging
All
piece
right.
like this. But
So I want to talk about one of the, I mean, what we've been talking about this whole time, why we can't have nice things and all this, constitutional usurpations, are ways in which the Trump administration has kind of thrown the government into a blender. But there's just like one area where that's not totally happening. And, we saw that in detail this week. So this week, on Monday, the trial between the Federal Trade Commission and Facebook began, which is a monopolization case that says the acquisitions by Facebook in 2012 and 2014, respectively, of Instagram and WhatsApp were illegal and need to be unwound. Mark Zuckerberg was on the stand for 2 days. Sheryl Sandberg was on the stand for a day. They were being shown these emails that very clearly say, yes, we bought Instagram to neutralize a competitor. We bought WhatsApp because we were worried about a competitor. It's very clear what happened. And that trial is ongoing and it's being pursued by Trump's FTC. At the same time, on Wednesday, Google, in a case brought by Biden's Justice Department, was once again labeled a monopolist, this time in the advertising technology markets, saying that they monopolized these markets and then excluded rivals, forced advertisers to pay, or forced publishers to take less for ads because they were extracting more rent out of these ad exchanges that they were running. And then at the same time, next Monday, the remedy phase of the other case where Google was found a monopoly, the search case where they basically bought access to browsers and devices and muscled out competitors. That begins next Monday. So somebody, a former FTC official, I believe, John Mark Newman, described this as the most important 2 weeks in the 135-year history of the antitrust laws. And
Yeah,
it's happening.
And for our industry, by the way, let's
And
also
for our industry, I mean, this is all about media and publishing, all of it. And all of this is happening at the same time that practically in every other area of the government, there's completely no continuity between what Trump is doing and what was done in the past. And it's really, really interesting to see this take place at the same time, where it's not just, I mean, a good example is the Facebook case. It was brought by the first Trump administration at the end of 2020. Lena Khan's FTC pursued the case, won. The judge ruled against Facebook's motion to dismiss it, and now the trial is happening under Trump too. At the same time, so there's like this real continuity here, and it's just I think the reason why is that it's about an intellectual foundation that has been built in this antitrust movement over the last several years, rather than being in the realm of politics and political affect.
Yeah,
Like,
I have a simpler explanation, which is JD Vance. I mean, I agree with you
well, sure.
that it's an intellectual current, absolutely, and we followed that for
But
a long time.
I mean, Vance is part of that. Like,
But I
he
think this
bought
is
into it.
Vance's pet project. You see not only these cases, you see FTC enforcement guidelines that look, very good.
The merger guidelines have been retained from
But also there was
2023.
also a new
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
there was also a series of enforcement guidelines. Then you also saw at DOJ the antitrust division. I'm blanking on the woman's name who's in charge.
Gail Slater.
Later fought really hard to preserve the integrity of that division from the Doge cuts.
Right now, there's still a big fight over whether they're going to keep the San Francisco office open, which is the office that did the Google case and is working on the current case against Apple.
But you see what I'm saying is you see some resistance to
they're fighting that. Yeah,
the pure strain of Trump, and I think that part of why they've been effective, as we saw in the JD Vance, Hegseth, Michael Waltz leaks, is that Vance. I think a lot of people said, the most relevant thing here is that we're leaking battle plans. And to me, I thought that was BS. I think the most relevant thing was trust advocates and then kind of backs it off at the last minute to keep his donors happy. But I also think there's a chance that Trump loves seeing a good old beatdown of a former ally. He got Zuckerberg to come. He got him to give $1 million. He got him to bend the knee.
right.
But there's a chance that he's the first sacrificial lamb of the administration, and that this is what the blood he throws to the masses.
It's very possible. I think that Trump recognized that he didn't have to solve this fight right now. The way that these monopolization cases work is they come in two phases. There's a trial that determines whether, in this case, Facebook is liable. And then there's a second phase, which is the remedy phase. That's what Google's moving into. And so, they can wait. Trump didn't have, presidencies are big things. There are people who want to, let Facebook off with a warning, and there are people that want to prosecute them within the government, and they've been fighting. Zuckerberg showed up at the White House. Gail Slater and Andrew Ferguson and I guess Mike Davis from the outside showed up at the White House, and they both made their different arguments. Uh, Trump realized, I don't have to solve this right now. Maybe Facebook wins the case, and then I don't have to decide, right? Or maybe we get to the remedy phase and something else happens and I don't have to decide. I can put this off and put this off, and I don't take the political hit. We're seeing, however, in the remedy phase that starts Monday of the Google case, the Biden Justice Department put out their initial request for a remedy, and it was a breakup of Google, saying we need to break off Chrome and we need to break off the Android operating system. The Justice Department under Trump had a chance to change that, to alter that remedy request, and they didn't for the most part. There were a couple of things they changed, but largely intact. And you don't hear about Sundar Pichai going to the White House right now. You don't hear about Trump wanting to make a deal and settle on that case. So I think that we are seeing a little bit of continuity here. And I think Vance's role in that, as you correctly identify, is really, really important. The interesting thing to me is that, so 6 years ago, I'm talking about the ad tech case now that was decided this week. The verdict was this week. 6 years ago, one of my first things that I ran, I think you were an intern at this time. One of the first things that I ran was this piece about how digital advertising really works and how your privacy is exploited in these real-time auctions, and how Google controls both sides of the market and all of this stuff. And it was written by a woman named Dina Srinivasan, who is a former advertising executive, one of the really big ad companies, WPP. And she wrote this piece. She's also written other things like the antitrust case against Facebook. After she wrote this piece for us in 2019, she started advising Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General, on a case against Google, which was filed in 2021. The Justice Department took parts of that case and made it their case in the ad tech case in 2023. And now that case has been decided where the arguments were accepted. So you see this sort of move from the page, from the realm of ideas into a legitimate action against Facebook. And that trajectory is really fascinating to me.
So I want to ask you about that, because
you probably fact checked it or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Okay, well, now you can add more facts onto the pile, which is like, when people outside of the realm of media ask me, like, what happened? I feel like the simplest answer is kind of like ad tech. Like that's kind of
what happened to journalism, you mean?
Yeah. What
Google and Facebook took all the money. That's the answer.
Right. Yeah. But my question is, what is the best case scenario in the next year or two if we get the best case?
Right. If you get the best remedy here, then Google has to sell off its ad exchange. They'd have to sell off its ad server for publishers, and there would be competition in those markets. And so the 30 to 50% out of every ad dollar that Google takes for itself could now be 10%. It could be 5%. And the rest of that money would flow to publishers, which means publishers would get a lot more money for advertising. And that money could be used to hire more people like Dan Boguslaw to investigate and report on various activities. So that's the best case scenario, is that this business model that journalism had for most of its lifetime, where it was a combination of subscriptions and advertising, suddenly became we don't have the advertising anymore. That money is beer money compared to everything else. So we're going to have to ramp up subscriptions. We're going to have to gate things. We're going to have to put paywalls up, and we're going to have to do that. And some of us aren't going to be able to do that because we simply don't have the audience to sustain it. So we're going to go out of business. This would be a restoration of that business model.
I think for me, it's kind of like one of the most exciting developments that could possibly happen. I mean, I tell people over and over and over again, people are confused. I think a lot of people think that, like, just the digital revolution changed the way people consume news, and somehow people weren't buying hard copies. And I think a lot of times people don't understand that, this is like the in some senses, the whole destruction of our democracy is in some sense a
Mhm.
monopoly problem, because it's a monopoly on ads, and therefore it creates completely perverse incentives for the transaction of information, basic information,
Right.
local.
And then the second part of that, there are two other parts of that I want to talk about. The first is that your audience is no longer special. Facebook and Google, through their tracking software, can look at you as you cross through various parts of the internet. So let's say I know that everybody at the American Prospect is makes this amount of money and disproportionately buys cars. Let's just say that for the sake of argument. Well, I can't sell to an advertiser, look, we know that people on our site want to buy cars, so you should advertise your car on our website, because Facebook can give you specifically people who've been searching for cars. Google can tell you who's been doing those searches, and you can narrow target them specifically, and you have a much better chance of being successful. So Facebook made audiences no longer special, and that was a huge blow to publishers. So that's number one. The second part of this is that you say like you relate this to sort of democracy itself. I mean, we have numbers that there are 2,500 counties across the country that no longer have a newspaper. The University of North Carolina did this incredible study. You take that spotlight away from communities, and it's just an invitation for corruption. It's an invitation for susceptibility to narratives that are put out by self-interested ideologues.
And
It's
I want to add one more thing. It's an invitation for the national media to get the story wrong. And I think
That's right.
time and time again, you see that where
That's
there's
right.
no theater, there's no sense of what's happening, and they just completely miss what Americans are thinking. They miss Trump. They miss Trump 2.0.
Indeed. And, this is going to sound, I'm trying to figure out a way to segue this to not make it sound totally crass, but we're having a spring fundraiser right now. I mean, I do think it's important to think about, until we reach this point where these monopolies are dislodged, and that we can get into this place where that we have the means to survive through this other business model. Right now, the focus is on people like the people who are listening out there, and so you go to prospect.org/donate. That's our spring campaign. I'm sure the link is over there in the corner. In terms of this fight against creeping authoritarianism, having the ability of people like you, Dan, to go out and shed a light on what is happening is absolutely crucial to being able to sustain this kind of movement in the streets, to give them the tools and knowledge that they need to continue the fight. And so it is important, and I don't want to be kind of flippant about it. Like, it really is. It matters a lot to us, and it means, it's the difference between us being able to hang on to our staff or not, or the difference between us being able to grow or not and continue to give you this work. So that's my pitch. We are just about out of time. And I want to thank you, Dan Boguslaw, contributor to the American Prospect. Looking forward to great stuff over the next few months. And we are here every Friday at 12:30 Eastern. We put this video up on the website, so you'll see this up on the website later if you didn't check it out live. And we want you to keep coming back. Didn't get any questions today, but often we do. So feel free to ask us stuff in the comments. And we will see you later.